I'm going to set record up as well, just while we're going. Okay, no questions? Excellent. I presume that was because I answered all of your questions last time round, and everything was fine. Okay, so this one then I'm gonna set off straight away. You'll remember that we set up a very simple app that just had a little bit of interaction last time. This time our aim is to create the cat years app. So I'll just bring in what we're aiming for. It won't necessarily look exactly like this, but it will more or less have this set up with a title and then a question of what's your cat's age, and the user will put in the cat's age into the box, and our app will multiply it by 7 and return it to the user in that label. If we have time, we'll go on and make a slightly more complicated app called higher or lower as well, which will do, that'll use Swift a little bit more to do some if statements and a little bit more complicated stuff. I'll also leave a bit of time at the end for questions, so please do ask if anything comes up that you'd like me to explain or go through. All right, does that sound okay? Anything at this point? Oh, no one, oh, you can't see my screen. Okay, let's try that. Okay, good job I didn't do anything. Okay, right, now we're on. Sorry, okay, so the app that we're making, as you missed it, is this one here. So that's the design that we're going for. It's pretty simple, but it gets the job done. I'm going to start a new project, and I recommend that you follow along if you can, if you've got a Mac then. I'm going to start from scratch just to remind ourselves what the process is. So we're in Xcode, of course, on our Mac, and we go to File, New, Project. Just close that for the moment. And then Single View Application, because we've only got a single view or screen in our app. And then I'm just going to call it the real cat years, because I called the application that we worked on last week cat years as well, so just to differentiate it from that. And then I won't go through all of these again, but you should leave those as the default settings. You can then save that anywhere on your machine. I'll save it in the desktop. And then hopefully you'll remember this interface. We've got the main body of Xcode in the center, which is going to be where we're working. Then we've got these left and right panes, which we can make appear or disappear with the buttons at the top right there. And we can also bring in a second big pane with the assistant editor, which is those two circles there. All right, so we're going to start, as we usually do, with main storyboard. We're going to set up how our app looks, and then we'll set up the logic of it after that. So here we go. You need to zoom it so that the view controller is pretty big in your screen. And as we did last time, I'm going to click on view controller and then change the size to iPhone 4.7 inch so that the view controller that I'm working with here is the same size as the iPhone screen that I'm going to be testing on. I'll just change that to iPhone 6s, which is 4.7 inches on the diagonal. All right, so do you remember what our text type is? Hopefully you remembered that it was a label. So we'll bring in label and then we'll drag it around until we get it in the center. And I'm just going to bring it down a little bit from there. Then we double click, and this is going to be the title of our app. So we'll call it Cat Years. We make the box a little bit bigger, and I'm just going to mess around a little bit with the color. So we'll have a sort of purple here. I'm going to make it bigger. Move everything over there. Lovely. And you remember we changed the font by clicking on the T and then going to custom font. And one I always like for titles is Papyrus. Okay, and then we'll center it and position it again so it's recentered. All right, there's our title. Then we'll bring in our second label, which is just going to be the instructions for the user. So something like, how old is your cat? And I'm not going to style that, but I'm going to pop that in there. Okay, let's just have a quick look, see if anyone's got any questions or can't see my screen. Nope, good. All straightforward so far. Then we bring in a text field, which is going to allow the user to enter the cat's age, and I'm going to stretch that to the edge of the screen. Not that they really need a great width, but makes it look a bit nicer, I think. And then we'll have our button which I'll change to get age in cat years. And then finally, this is the new bit, we want a, well, not quite finally, but almost, we want a label there, and that's where the cat's age is going to go. So I'm going to leave it as it is for the moment, but this is going to be blank initially, and then we're going to update that with the age of the cat once we've figured it out. All right, so that's all the labels, buttons, and text fields. Then we're just going to bring in an image, just to remind ourselves how to do it, really. So I'm going to go over to Google Images and search for cat. I think I'll go for a clip art one, and I think that was the one I used before, but actually I quite like the look of this one. So I'm going to download that one. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's not wanting to let me save that one. Maybe I'll go to old reliable. No, that's not working either. That's a shame. Okay, not to worry. Maybe we'll miss out the image part of the webinar. Sorry about that. It's very mysterious. Has anyone seen that before? The options grayed out to save the image? No, I'm assuming not. Okay. Well, it's not a critical part of our app anyway. It just makes it look a little bit prettier. But there we go. Sorry, for some reason I can't save a cat image there. So feel free to put one in there. You'll remember that when we have downloaded it, all we do is drag the file into the file structure over on the left, and then we add it in an image view. So we'd add the image view, something like this, drag it out, and then we'd select the image from the drop down there. I don't know why it's not letting me save an image. Bit of a shame, but not critical as far as our app is concerned. All right, so that's our layout. Nothing new there from what we did last time, but hopefully that jogs your memory. Any questions or comments at this point? Download button at the bottom of the screen. Let's see if it lets me do that. I'll give it a go. Okay, yes, thank you. That looks promising. I'll change it to cat. No, it's not letting me save though. Tell me something mysterious is going on with Chrome. Try again. There we go. It's because I had a dialog box open in another Chrome tab. Sorry about that, but there we go. We've got our cat now. So let's go back to Xcode. And then we'll drag cat.png, there it is, into our file structure. Copy items if needed, create groups, and add it to targets. And now we've got our cat, so we should be able to drop down and add him there. There he is. Wonderful. And if you remember last time we had aspect fit is generally what we want to get the proportions right. Excellent, that's better. I feel better now that we've got a real cat in there. Now then, it's time to do the coding part, the exciting bit. Now, we didn't spend a lot of time looking at viewcontroller.swift last time, but you'll remember that this is where the code happens, and this is where we drag and create interfaces between our code and our layout. But I didn't talk very much about what's going on here, so I'll just quickly run through this. First off, anything with a double slash in front of it in Swift becomes a comment. So essentially I can write whatever text here I like and it won't be processed. So it's just a way of leaving some information for yourself or for someone else who's reading this code later on. So that's what all the double slashes at the top are about, and that's just some default code there from Xcode. Then we've got import UIKit. Now, UIKit is a framework provided by Apple which allows us to interact with the user interface. So that's pretty standard. We need that for almost every app that we're going to make because we're going to do something with the user interface. When you're doing more complex things, then there are other frameworks to import as well, but we won't be doing any of that here, but we do it in the course. It's with things like when you're working with maps or GPS or sound or video, that kind of thing, then you import those frameworks when you need them. Then this code here, we're creating what's known as a class. Now, a class is quite a tricky thing to explain, but essentially it's a chunk of code that contains various variables and functions that we can use in a certain situation. And this view controller class is the variables and functions, chunks of code that we'll use with our view. So essentially it's a way of collecting together all of the code that we're going to use with this particular view. And remember we saw very briefly last time the colon, which is used in Swift to denote a type. So all variables and indeed classes have a type, and this view controller has a type of UI view controller. So this just specifies what type of class this is, and the type is a UI view controller. There's loads and loads of different types of classes that refer to different UI elements or completely different things within your app, like sound and video. But this is a UI view controller. Then we've got the curly brackets, which just contain the code for our class, as we saw last time. And then we've got, I'm going to ignore the word override for the moment, we'll come back to it. We're creating a function. It's actually specifically called a method. Method and function are kind of interchangeable, but with object-oriented code, which is what we're doing here, with classes and also objects. Although we're not looking at objects today, we call them methods, but they still use func to define them. So essentially, when you hear the word function or method, they're more or less the same thing. So we're creating a function here, and it's called viewDidLoad. And this is a standard iOS function which will be called when the view is loaded. So essentially, it will run when this view appears. So when this screen that we've got with the content on it appears. And this override here indicates that this viewDidLoad method or function already exists. So we're not actually creating it, we're just adding some code to it. So viewDidLoad does a bunch of things already within the app as standard, but we're adding some code to it. So any code that we write in here will run when the app is run, essentially. So pretty much all of our code today, well, not all of it actually, but some of it is going to go inside the viewDidLoad method. And anything that you wanted to happen on app launch would happen there. So if, for example, I wanted to just check that the app had indeed launched, then I could add the line print app has launched, something like that. We saw this last time. So print prints some text to the console, and then we have parentheses to contain our text, and then our text is a string, and we define strings with double quotes like that. So now if we run the app, it will run on the emulator here on my computer, and then when it's run, we should get app has launched appearing. There we go. Got a bunch of information that we don't need there. Let's shut that down. We should find that app has launched appears in the console. While that's running, we'll just have a quick look at did receive memory warning. This is the second standard method or function there, but we don't need to worry too much about that. Essentially, if there's a memory warning, then this function, will run, and we can then do something to control that memory warning. So to use less memory, or to warn the user that the app might crash or something like that. But we're not going to do anything like that here. So essentially the bits that we're interested in are the viewDidLoad method and the area of the code around here, which is where we're going to add our IB actions and IB outlets, which we saw last time. All right, so I've covered a lot of stuff there. I've probably used several words that you may not have heard before, so I will check for questions in a moment, but let's just note that the app has indeed launched, and we've got this code running as soon as the app runs. All right, any questions out of all of that? Can you drag an image directly to the project from the web? I wouldn't have thought so. I've never actually tried to do it. We can give it a shot. Let's see if we can make that happen. So I've got the web there. Too many windows open as ever. Let's get rid of that one. So if I try and drag that in, no, I don't think this is going to work. No, it needs to be added as a file. Oh, well, maybe. No, it's not letting me drag that in. No, so you need to download it to your computer first as an image, and then add it. Add that image file is essentially what you're doing. Okay. Right. So now let's add the IB actions and IB outlets as we did last time. So we don't need to interact with that title up there or that label at all. So we don't need anything there, but we will need to interact with the text field there. Now this is going to be where the user enters their cat age. So I'm going to call it users cat age. There we go. So that means I will be able to refer to this text field using the variable users cat age. And then we'll need an IB action this time for our button, and I'll call that workout age in cat years. You'll definitely find as you're writing your code that the more precise you can be about variable names, the much easier it is to follow your code and change it and fix it as you go along. Okay, and finally, we're going to want to update the text of that label. So I'll call that result label. All right, there we go. Now that I've got result label, I'm going to actually not delete it, but delete its contents. So it's empty until we do something to change its contents. All right, so our code is going to run when the button is pressed. We don't actually need to do anything before that point. So that's where all of our code is going to be. And we need to do a few things there. We need to get the age that the user has entered first off. And we need to then multiply it by 7 and display it in the label here. Now that seems fairly straightforward, but it's not actually quite as trivial as all that. So let's see how we do it. So first off, I'm going to create a variable called users cat age value. I've got an internal error. Fantastic. I think we're okay. We'll just carry on. And this is going to be the value of the text field here. So to get the text field, we type users cat age, and then to get the text, we use .text. Now this is what's known as an optional in Swift. which is a very nasty word to describe something fairly simple. Essentially, this may or may not have a value. So it's optional until we insist that we know for sure that it has a value. And to say that we know for sure it has a value, we use an exclamation mark like that. So this is a way of saying, no, don't worry, Swift. Users catAge.text definitely has a value, and we're telling you that it does because we've got this exclamation mark, and so we'd like to assign it to users catAge value. All right, so now we've got the users catAge as a value. We're not going to be able to multiply it by 7 in its current form, though, because it's currently in the form of text. And Swift is a typed language, which means that every variable has a strict type. So even if the user enters a number in here, it will be stored as a string. So we need to convert that number to that string, to a number before we can do maths on it, before we can multiply it by 7 in our case. So to convert that to an integer or a whole number, we're going to create another variable. So users cat age int. So int is short for integer, which is just a way of saying a whole number. And we're definitely going to want a whole number here. So what we're going to do is take the user's cat age value, which is the user's cat age, but as a string. And then we want to convert that to an integer. So we use the method or function int. So the int function applied to user's cat age value will have the same thing, but this time it will be an integer rather than a string. So it's just changing the type of the variable. And again, we have to say to Swift, don't worry, it's okay, we know that this is going to work. And our way of saying that is putting an exclamation mark at the end there. All right, so we've got a few complicated concepts there. Anything that you'd like me to clarify? Will we need to use any other classes for this app? No is the short answer. There are times when would you need to use another class. You can almost get away completely without using your own classes. The points at which you would want to use other classes are when you start building big apps. So when you've got massive apps with 10 different views in them and loads of different types of logic and loads of things that the user can do, or even games and things like that, then you need to have a way of collecting together the relevant functions and the relevant variables in a way that makes sense and is manageable. And classes are generally agreed to be the best way to do that. So, for example, if you were making a game and a Mario game, for example, then you would probably have a class designed around your Mario character. And this would contain all of the variables about that character. So his height, his, speed, all of that sort of thing, as well as methods or functions related to that character. So his ability to jump, what happens when the user presses the A button, etc. And you then have a separate class for each type of sprite. So you might have one for Mario, one for Luigi, one for the mushroom that moves, etc. And that extends to pretty much all types of apps. Essentially, once the app gets to a certain size, it makes a lot of sense to keep everything separate. And generally agreed the best way to do that is using classes. Yes, the button is an action. You remember from last week, hopefully, that the difference between an action and an outlet is an outlet allows us to access the value of something or to change the value of something, whereas an action is a different thing. It creates some code that will be run when that button is clicked. So if you try and create an action for this, you can do it with a text field, but you can't do it with a label because there's nothing that the user can do with the label. They can't interact with them. So that's the difference between an action and an outlet. Oh, absolutely. Definitely. Thanks, George. You definitely can combine 20 and 22, those two lines of code, into a single line. I didn't because I didn't want to, I think it's slightly less confusing to have them on two separate lines. because we are doing two things here. We're getting the text from the text field, and then we're converting it into an integer. Definitely, we could do it on one line, but I think it's simpler and slightly more straightforward to do it on two. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Right, so now we've got our user's cat age as an integer. We're now going to create our third and final variable, which is going to be cat age in cat years, which is exactly what it says on the tin. We're going to take our user's cat age int, and we're going to multiply it by 7. So Shift 8 on my keyboard, the asterisk sign is what we use in programming for multiply. And so now we've got a variable cat age in cat years, which is our user's cat age, but multiplied by 7. All right, so we're actually pretty close. The last thing we need to do is update the result label here with the new value. So we do that using result label dot text, and we want that to equal something like your cat is XXX in cat years. And we want, of course, to replace the XXX with the age, which is cat age in cat years. And the way you do that in Swift is you use a backslash and then brackets, and then inside the brackets you put the variable that you want to appear there. So we want cat age in cat years. There we go. So this is a way of saying set the result label text to your cat is, and then whatever cat age in cat years is, in cat years. All right, so that's it. Let's try running it. I do seem to be having some internal errors here. I'll explain those warnings in a moment. But while that's running, any questions that have appeared recently? Oh, good question. Do all variables have global scope in this file? So that's a very good question, George. So scope is the concept that a variable that is created in one part of your code is not necessarily accessible from another part of your code. And that is certainly true. So we can actually see it down here. If I try and access user's cat age value, there, it works absolutely fine. However, if I try and access it down here, user's cat age value, it's not there. So anything that's defined within a particular function or method will not be accessible outside that function or method. However, anything that's created outside a function or method, like user's cat age up here, will be accessible inside any method next to it. So user's cat age, whoops. All right, let's move over here. User's cat age here will be accessible from here in this method or in the viewDidLoad method. And we can see that there from the auto predict, it does give us that. But user's cat age value will only be accessible from the workout age in cat years method here. So yes, scope is definitely an issue in Swift. Things don't generally have global scope. Why don't we use int user's cat age value? Well, we do more or less, but the issue here is that, well, let's see it in an example actually, and I'll come back to questions after that. I think I can show you more clearly in an example. So if I put that my cat is 3, get age in cat years, nothing happens. Why is that? Okay, something's gone wrong. Is it the error that I had earlier? Maybe I removed the result label for some reason. Tricky one. Right. Get all that back. So result label should definitely be there. Oh. Could be behind the cat image, but I don't think so. Okay, so result label is not showing at all for some reason. I think what I might do, not sure what's gone wrong, I'm just going to drag in a new label, which is visible. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to get rid of result label. So I'm just going to press delete, and then I'm going to get rid of my result label outlet and add a new result label for my new result label. Okay. Let's try that again. Keep your fingers crossed. Okay, so now I put in 3, get age in cat years. Okay, great. So it did work, but the label wasn't wide enough. That's fine. If anyone wants to tell me what went wrong with the previous one, please do. And I'll just make the text slightly smaller. In case we need it to be as well, and we'll center it there. And then I'll take a chance and get rid of it. And let's just have a quick look. We should be working fine now. So my cat is 4, your cat is 28 in cat years. Great, so the app is working. So why do we need this exclamation mark here, I think was the question that we're dealing with at the moment. And that's because there's a chance that the user won't enter a number here. So he might enter 4, for example, like that. And what will happen if we press this button, something horrible, we'll get this horrible crash. And you can see the crash that we've got here is unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value, which might not make a lot of sense, but actually it's quite a sensible error message once you know what it's saying. What we're trying to do here is to convert a value of a string to an integer, and that will only work if the string actually contains an integer. So if the user writes the number 4, we can't, writes the word 4, we can't convert that to an integer, so it will fail. So this is actually not great programming in itself. It works, but what we're doing is taking a risk that our user is entering the numbers correctly. And if you like, I'll show you the way around that, but it's slightly complicated, which is why I haven't done it here. But if you want to, just add that to the questions, and I'll show you that, how we fix that problem later on. But that's why we have to have this exclamation mark here. How would one change the numeric formatting? Oof. Good question. There's no hugely simple way. Yikes. What you would do is, so if you wanted to have 10,000, I presume you're saying something like, if you've got the number 10,000 like that, and you want it to display like that, what you would have to do is to divide your number by 1,000 to get 10, and then put that number with the comma and then the other zeros after that. There are some standard formattings in Swift, so you can use some built-in Swift functions to display probably text like that. But if you want some custom formatting, then you need to do the work yourself, essentially, and break down the number and put it back together again afterwards. Thank you for your answer. You're very welcome, George. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, when I deleted the content of that label, it made the label too small, so that when I put the content back in, it wasn't big enough. Yep, that's it. Okay, so our app now works. The one thing I'd like to show you before we move on is why we're getting all these warnings here. If we click on one of the warnings, it'll tell us the variable user's cat age was never mutated. Consider changing let to let constant. So essentially, we've got two different types of variables in Swift. We've got ones that vary and ones that don't. And Swift is very keen on us making clear whether a variable is the sort of variable that should change, such as the time spent playing a game, which is going to change as the user plays more, or is it the sort of variable which shouldn't change, such as the height that Mario jumps to in his game. That's something which should be fixed, and we should make it clear that that's the case. And all of these variables actually never change, at least within each running of the function. So we should change all of those to let to be slightly more precise. Okay, unless anyone's got any particular requests, then I'll show you how to get around this problem that we have of the potential crashes if the user enters something which isn't a number. Oh, would a float input work? George, you've got all the fancy questions. I'm not quite sure what you mean by a float input there. A float, to those people that haven't seen floats before, is short for floating point number, which is more or less another way of saying a decimal number. So an integer can only be a whole number. It could never be 3.45, whereas a float could. We couldn't get a float input if you're talking about our user's cat age here. Our user's cat age is coming from a text field, so will always be text. But we could convert from an integer to a float instead, just like that, and that would actually work exactly the same way. It would just mean that we could deal with non-integer numbers. The reason I didn't do that first time is I didn't want to explain what a float was, because they're a lot more complicated than integers. But yeah, it would work fine with a float as well. Okay, Nicole's got a question, just curious. In the States, it said that dogs are 7 times older than human years. Oh, really? I don't know. It may well be different in the UK. I don't have a cat. I don't know much about cats. When I first made this app, I Googled how many cat years are in human years, and I got the answer 7. And I've believed it ever since. But yeah, I've no idea whether it's different in the States or in the UK, I'm afraid. We'll just have to go with 7. Of course, it's pretty trivial to change your code to 9 if you want to. Can I enter 2.5? Good question. Well, it'd be worth trying. Let's see what happens. So if we enter, oh, we've already crashed here. So as we're running it, have a think about what do you think to the answer to George's question? What's going to happen when we enter 2.5? Let's see. We get a horrible crash. And that's possibly to be expected, because what we're trying to do is convert our 2.5, as you can see it is there, to an integer, which doesn't work. 2.5 is not an integer. So it has to be an integer just in another form. If, however, we changed int to float, then our code will work just as well with whole numbers, but it will also cope with non-whole numbers. So if we put 5 in there, that works fine. But you can see we now get 35.0 because we're working with decimals now. But if we put 5.4 in, then that works fine as well. We could even go to any level of accuracy that we wanted. All right. Anything else? Fair enough. Thanks, Nicole. Add a country you're in. I guess so. What do you mean we could have a drop-down menu for the country that you're in and then change the cat's age multiplier depending on the country? We could do that. I don't think we're going to do that here. but I will show you how to avoid this crash. So the crash occurs, remember, when the user enters something, let's go back to int just to keep things simple, that can't be converted to an integer. So there's a slightly weird construction that we use in Swift. And it works like this. So we take our let userscat age equals int that, and we put an if in front of it. And when we've got an if in front of it, we don't need the exclamation mark, but we can still do something after the if statement. So what this if statement means is essentially, if this definition works, then do something. So what we could do is take our code here and put it inside our if statement, like that. So this means if, and then this chunk of code, and if it works, then do this, which is what we want to happen. And then we could even add an else statement to say that, so if the statement works, do this. If it doesn't, then we could update the result label.text with something like, please enter a number. Or indeed, we could be more precise and say whole number. So if we run that now, it won't crash, no matter what we enter. If we enter a number, then it'll work. If we enter something which isn't a number, it'll ask us to enter a number. So let's just check, make sure it still works. There we go. And if I enter 5 and some characters, then we get this much more graceful response saying, please enter a whole number, rather than a massive crash. Even if we don't enter anything, it still works fine. So that's a more graceful version of what we had before. All right, that's really as far as I wanted to go with cat ears. So I'll have another look for questions, and then I think we've just about got time to make our higher or lower app. So any questions? Nope, we're good. Okay, thanks then, Shane. Right, so higher or lower. This was actually a game show in England. I don't know if you guys had it in the States, but we had a game show of higher or lower where you had to guess whether the next card was going to be higher or lower than the previous card. And that's the game that we're going to make in the next sort of 15 minutes or so. By the way, if anyone does have any questions, then now's the time to answer them, because we do have a little bit of time left. So I'm going to make this super quickly. We're going to start with a label to tell the user what to do. I'm going to put my view controller back on 4.7 inches. And let's make it between 0 and 10. So essentially, we're going to attempt to guess the number that the user has, that the computer or the phone has picked, and it's going to tell us higher or lower. Great fun. Let's bring in our text field. I'll leave it narrow this time. And then once again, we'll have a button. For guess. And we'll have a final label that we'll use to tell the user whether they're right or not, or whether they need to go higher or lower. I'm not going to make the same mistake I did last time. All right, so once again, we create our IB actions. I'm control dragging. I'm going to create an outlet for the guess. I'm going to create an action for the guess button. I'll call that check guess. And I'll create an outlet for the label, which again will be result label. Okay, so this time what we want the phone to do is to pick a random number when the game loads. And remember, we do that in viewDidLoad method. So we're going to create a variable, which actually is not going to vary. So we'll use let. And this is going to be a random number. And we want the computer or the phone to create that when the app runs, not when the button is pressed. So we've got our definition of random number. We need to know how to create a random number. There's a function in Swift called arc4random. Underscore uniform. And what this does is essentially creates a random number up to the number that you specify. So this will create a random number between 0 and 10. Now these numbers will have lots of decimal places in them, and that's not what we want. So we're going to use int again to convert them into integers. Let's just check. I've got a warning there. Oh yes, okay, yeah, we can ignore that. Go away. There we go. So the warning actually was telling us that because we're not using this variable anyway, we don't need to give it a name, but we are going to be using it later on, so we do need to give it a name. So there's our random number. I've just realized that for my check guess, I created an outlet rather than an action. So let's fix that. I'll call it check guess 2. And this time it's going to be an action. There we go. So once again, we need to get the user's guess. So I'll call it guess value. And this is going to be guess.text. And again, we're going to force unwrap that. Then we need to convert it to an integer. So let's do that the good way this time. So if GuessInt equals the integer version of guess value, then we can do what we want to do. If not, we'll update the result label to ask them to guess a number between 0 and 10. Oh, and we want result label.text. Okay. I'll just pause there to see if we've got any questions. Any recommendations on other software that will allow me to build a connected storyboard that I can then share a coder to help me code it? I think what you're saying is to create some wireframes, essentially some ways of sharing what you want the screen to look like. And yes, there is one. I don't use it a lot. I can't remember quite what it's called, but if I do a quick Google, if you Google for wireframe apps or something like that, then what's the one that I use? Oh, there's loads. Balsamic is the one that I've used. And I actually know the guy who makes it as well, and he's a great guy. So I definitely recommend using Balsamic. But if you Google for wireframe apps or something like that, there's a few free ones, few guides to the best ones. And yeah, the only one that I've used, and I've not used it a lot, but I've heard very good things about it, is Balsamic there. And Craig, how to run on the iPhone? Yeah, that's another good question. Essentially, you connect your iPhone to your computer via USB and follow some instructions. It's not a great thing for me to show you because you obviously won't be able to see my iPhone screen, but it's pretty straightforward. Xcode app on your iPhone. If you just Google that, there you go. So you connect your device to your Mac, so you connect your phone to your computer, and then in Xcode, you choose Window Devices and select the device under Devices. So it's going to be there. So you can see here are all my simulators. If I had a phone connected, it would appear there as well. So then you would select that there. And then, then you'd add it as a device using plus, and then choose the iOS app file and then open. I don't think actually you need to do those last two bits. I think once you've selected it in devices, it will then appear in this menu here as a device up there, and then you'll just be able to run it directly. Okay. You don't see a variable GuessInt defined. Aha, someone's going ahead. I'm very glad that you mentioned that. That's great. I was kind of anticipating it, seeing if someone would spot it. So, can anyone see why? Oh, wait a minute. Or is that the... Oh, no, that's not the issue that I was hoping you'd see. You can't see a variable GuessInt defined. Is that because you're trying to access GuessInt down there? I suspect it is. GuessInt is only defined within this blue chunk of code here because it's within that if statement. So I can use GuessInt here, but I can't use it outside those curly brackets. Okay, so back to where we were. So if we've got a GuessInt, then we want to check GuessInt against random number. So let's check to see if GuessInt is greater than random number. And this is actually what I thought you were asking, which is you might notice that random number is not defined down there. That's because I've created random number down here inside the viewDidLoad method. So it's not going to be accessible from this method up here. But don't panic. All we need to do is define it as a global variable up here. So we could have something like let random number equal 0 initially, and then down here, instead of creating it in viewDidLoad, we're just going to update its value. And to access it, I'm not quite sure why we're getting an error there. Oh, yes. Okay. Because I now need to make it a variable because it's changing its value. It starts off at being 0 and then changes to whatever the random number is. So now that I've defined it up here, its scope is global. So I can reference it anywhere in my viewController class. So now the autopredict will get it for me. So if their guess is too big, then we want to update result label to say lower, because they need to guess lower than what they guessed before. We can also check if GuessInt is less than random number, and if that's the case, they need to guess higher. And the only other option is that it's equal to that number. So then we'll update result label to say you got it. So this is a collection of if statements here. We've got an initial if statement, which checks something. Then if that doesn't turn out to be true, we've got a second if statement, then checks something else. And then we've got a kind of catch-all, which doesn't check anything, but if those two statements aren't true, then this last one is actioned, regardless of anything else being true. All right, so that should work. I'll just run it. Oh, I don't like the 6S plus. Run it on the 6S, and while it's compiling, see if you've got any more questions. What's the process for finally advertising your app? Do you need to patent? Oh, great question. Unfortunately, the process for posting your app on the App Store is a painfully long and arduous one that changes quite regularly. But the good news is I've got a video on exactly how to do it in my course. So essentially, you do most of it within Xcode. You have to obviously check your app on a real phone, make sure it works well, there are no bugs. Then you create launch screens for it and icon images and all of that sort of stuff. And then once you've got all of that, you have to do a process called signing, which essentially means that you own the app, and it makes it clear that it's your app and only you can edit it and control it. And then once you've done that, you upload it to the App Store and you wait 10 to 15 days or so for Apple to decide whether it's worth going on the App Store or not. But yeah, it's a really long process, but there is a video guide to doing it absolutely step by step towards the end of the course. Do you need 3 curlies after the last else? No. We need 1 curly to finish off that else. Oh yes, because I see what you're asking, I think. In fact, yeah, something slightly strange has happened. So we've got an open one there and then close. Yeah, and then open and then close. And then we only need 2 there, 1 to finish off the else, and then 1 to close this method here. I'm not quite sure why we need 3. But yeah, if you want to clarify your question why you think we would need 3, I'll happily answer that. Okay, no worries, Mohammed, you're very welcome. Can you please confirm how we get access to the course material and videos? You'll need to check with whoever set up the webinar for you. They should have a code that you can use to access the course. If you can't get in touch with them, then drop me an email. I'll just give you my email address. It's there, and I'll make sure you get one, but they should have those for you. All right, so we're nearly done. Let's have a look on the simulator. So guess my number. Let's start with a 5. Guess lower. Okay, 3. Guess lower. 2. Guess lower. 1. Guess lower. I really hope it's a 0. Yes, it is a 0. Okay, fantastic. I thought if it was going to say lower then as well, then something had gone horribly wrong. We don't have time for that. So it's worked well. One obviously major downside of this app as it stands is that if you want to play it again, which of course you will because it's so much fun, you have to actually restart the app. So one obvious way to improve it would be to get the computer to guess a new random number once you've got it right, which actually is pretty easy. All we need to do is, once the user's got it, set up the random number again. So we do that, and then we could just add to that, try again, or something like that. So it's actually just 1 line of code, and then the user can play it as many times as they like. All right, that takes us pretty much to the end. As before, I'll stay around for questions for a few minutes and happily discuss things with you, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I've definitely enjoyed it. And I hope that you go on to have a look at the course and a few of you start making your own apps. Please do let me know how you go. Thanks very much. Yep, Carrie says it was all in the email he sent out. Thanks, Carrie. Interesting, George. You've done some Android programming before. Great. I think you'll find Xcode to be a prettier environment to work in than Android Studio. And Swift is a slightly nicer language, I think, than Java. at least at the basic level. But you will find some frustrations, believe me. But I'll leave those for you to discover. The if statements are nested. They are, I guess. These ones aren't nested as such. They're just if, else, if, else. A nested if statement is when you've got one if statement inside another. So this one is nested inside that one. So those two are nested, but the else if statements aren't really nested themselves, but those two are. You're very welcome, Nicole and Shane. The online class, what you'd want to do if you want to go and do the online class now is you want to start at chapter 3, which is the Swift Playgrounds chapter. That's just after the cat years app. So you make cat years. We don't actually make higher or lower in the course. We just make cat years, and then we go and look at Swift in more detail. So that's what you want to do when you go to the course. I presume you mean recommended reading on Swift. Do my course. That's obviously the best way forward. If you really do want to read something rather than watch something, then Apple has a really good free book on Swift. Where is it? There you go. Called The Swift Programming Language. And you can get it from the iTunes store. It's free. It's actually well rated. People like it, and it's really clear and easy to read. So that's, if you really do want to learn from a book, then that would be a good place to start. All right, hopefully I've answered all your questions. I will, of course, put this on YouTube, and I'm sure Carrie will share that with you. Thank you very much. I've had a great time. Hope you have as well. Bye-bye.